Day 383 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And we'll start off with taking a brief look at the Russian military losses today. So currently, Russia is sitting on 159,800 military personnel losses, which is just shy of that 160k mark. And as a reminder, this does not include wounded in action. Then we'll take a look at the hardware losses. So 8 tanks, 5 APVs, and 16 Russian artillery systems. So all in all, not a bad day. Then we'll move back across to the map now, and we'll start out in the Donbas, which we continue to do most recently. And we'll start out in the Westlands. So for instance, Sloviansk. So the Russian army continues to occasionally shell Sloviansk. Now, as a reminder, just 6 months ago, before the Russian army was pushed way back out of here, in fact, you can see where they were, as indicated by the green there, Sloviansk was terrorized on a nearly daily basis by those Russian forces previously stationed there. But now, these days, it's not within fantastic range of Russian weapon systems, so the town has had a bit of an opportunity to here and there take a bit of a partial breather in the last few months at least. Then zooming in to the front lines here, so we'll take a look at nearby Vuhledar, really to the west of there. So Russian forces have really been pushing northwest of Vuhledar in recent days, particularly on the M3 highway in the direction of Sloviansk as well, as you can see. Although to actually reach Sloviansk, any army can't just drive up the highway, for instance. They have to, at the same time, capture all of the land area to the left and the right of the highway as well, in order to actually reach any cities or towns up here. Then we'll move across to Bakhmut, or maybe northwest of Bakhmut yet again. So the Ukrainian artillery units stopped an assault attempt just overnight at the location of Bodanivka. So there it is right there. And the north here is where the heaviest fighting exists for Bakhmut at this moment. But what's really interesting to me about this area is that Wagner boss Prigozhin just said in the last day or so that he needs approximately $1 billion, so remeasured in US dollars, $1 billion US a month to sustain his offensive efforts in the region. But I've really got to break this down as best I can. So first of all, does that mean he's looking on a time scale of months as opposed to days for taking Bakhmut? Second of all, the mere fact that he's asked for this type or this amount of money is quite coincidentally representative of a fictional character and Prigozhin lookalike, Dr. Evil, who was also looking for the same amount in those Dr. Evil films, Austin Powers. So in a way, it appears like he's holding operational gains or the promise of operational gains for money. Sort of like a ransom. But after all, he is the head of a PMC, so a private militia company, or I should say military company, and they are in it for financial gain, so I guess we're not surprised by that. Then even if he were to obtain that kind of money, he would pretty steadfastly be on a recruitment drive internationally to get more men, because in the last 24 hours alone, for example, there's been no less than 530 Wagner and or Russian casualties in this one region alone. That's right, this little tiny dot on the map. And to add even further context to what's going on in the situation on the ground right here for now, so according to reports from Russian sources, including those with connections to Wagner, Ukraine is allegedly assembling a significant strike force of up to 10 brigades in the Chasiv Yar area, so right there. So the reports suggest that the Ukrainian forces are preparing for a large-scale counterattack in the direction of Bakhmut itself, potentially utilizing the new Leopard tanks they've just received, and strike drones as well. So Uncle Prigozhin, he has his concerns right now, which is in fact also pretty recent with pretty consistent with a recent call Uncle Prigozhin made in the last 24 hours or so, where he was calling Bakhmut a difficult situation right now. So this has taken it from the Russian side for once, really, or twice. So difficult situation right now for them due to the fact that Ukrainian forces are also bringing in a lot of reserves as well. So they got their reserves brought in. They've got 10 or so brigades on the back end, or the flank, if you will, of the larger Bakhmut region and even further. So, ouch. Then moving down on the map, we'll take a look at Vuhledar. So once again, Russian soldiers tried to control the south here today, but again were forced once more to retreat. And that is really all she wrote with that one today. Then even further down, so even 2 more loud explosions were reported in Mariupol. Initial early claims had it that Russia accidentally fired a long-range missile on itself in Mariupol. Anything's possible. I wouldn't ever rule something like that out, but it was more likely Ukrainian armed forces or Ukrainian partisan activity in the region, based on the surprising little amount of information we currently know about that one. Then we'll move across on the map if anything interesting is going on here. So Kherson, for instance, Ukrainian artillery hit and destroyed a Russian command post across the Dnipro River all the way at Oleshki. This was fairly heavily fired upon by Ukrainian forces about a month or 2 ago, especially around the time when Ukraine actually liberated the North Bank here. And I always love to zoom out and drive that point home for the bots in the comments. So Ukraine liberated 2,000 or 3,000 square miles of land. Anything green here, Russia used to occupy. No longer. And probably, given the size of the Dnipro River here, probably never again. Ouch again. But moving along where Russia is stationed at, so on the Kinburn Spit, so the Russian army continues to shell Ochakiv. There we go. This is actually in Mykolaiv, just across the river there, or the estuary. From the Kinburn Spit region, it would be really nice to get Russia out of this area with sufficient weapon systems and platforms, as this area right here would no doubt be part of an offensive strategy to take back the remainder of Kherson. Then, for a moment, let's move just a little bit down under to Crimea, where there's been some significant traffic jams reported day and night on the Kerch Bridge, the one that goes to Russia. And this is all amid increased security checks in the location in recent times, going to and fro. It appears Russia's paranoia is increasing relative to their insanity. Then we'll move across to some news for today. So this one seems pretty huge. So India is finally choosing a side, it seems. So it looks like the fence sitter India is looking to comply with sanctions against Russia in regards to the sanctioned ceiling prices on the Russian export oil prices there. You see, Russia has most recently been cheekily providing India with its oil at a discounted price, and India has also been cheekily accepting it, I should be, fair enough to say, simply because other markets stopped buying it. But the price of oil has gone up a bit, so Russia now wants India to pay over the sanctioned $60 limit in place internationally to purchase Russian oil. So perhaps it's a little bit self-serving for India. They don't want to pay above 60, the $75 price, that sort of thing. And why would they if everybody else is getting it at a cheaper price? So too should they. But either way, India's reasons aside, politically, it's seen as quite extraordinary. Then in some other news, Xi Jinping, president of China, is going to visit Russia and meet with Putin just next week, it's been reported. So, although China has generally pretty close ties with Russia, and has a Chinese peace plan for Ukraine that in fact doesn't even include the removal of Russian forces from Ukrainian soil, so we can chuck that peace plan out, I really won't be holding my breath for this meeting. But who knows, China could have a change of heart or a change of stance or rhetoric, and maybe even ask for some land back that Russia took from China about 150 years ago. But either way, my highest hope would be that these two autocratic individuals don't see complete eye to eye on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Then in some other news, Ukraine bumped itself up in the ranks to become the third largest arms importer in the world, certainly importer in the world, third largest, just behind India and Saudi Arabia, which of course makes sense given the current geopolitical climate in Eastern Europe right now. And as it turns out, Ukraine bumped Australia out of third place. But really, this is a little known ranking. You all may be more aware of, a bit more familiar with the world's largest arms exporters instead. So the US is number one, no guesses there, and Russia is number two. However, given Russia's dismal performance, trying to perform a land-based invasion of its next-door neighbor, who didn't turn out to be the girl next door, Russia has already lost 25% of its export arms market since the war, and that figure will just continue to drop. In fact, as potential arms buyers around the globe see the dismal performance of Russian hardware, they will just seek alternative avenues because they start to realize Russian tanks are junk, Russian jets are getting hit out of the sky, Russian air defense systems are not as good as they were expected to be, a lot of paper tigers going on. I mean, the list goes on, really. Then moving across to another Russian military mobilization blunder. So yet another group of mobilized Russians complain about the special operation they find themselves in. And these guys were really ticking off all the complaints on the list today, saying they're thrown into assault brigades with no communications or no reconnaissance. The wounded unnecessarily die from a lack of adequate medical treatment. They have no thermals or night vision. Their Donbas commanders intimidate them. Their average age is above 40. They only have assault rifles going up against Ukrainian tanks, mortars, and artillery in Avdiivka, so that makes a lot of sense on the map. But above all, they thought they were territorial defense troops before they got into Ukraine. But were instead thrown into fortified areas of Avdiivka and took an absolute pounding. And I'm just somehow reminded of the Russian narrative online, typically from the bots, that says Russia is saving their best equipment till last. And I keep asking, when is last? Is it after the third day that things didn't go their way? Was it when they withdrew from Kyiv, Kherson, Kharkiv, you name it, they left it? And no matter what day that is that they're saving their best equipment to last, they're certainly not saving it for this, guys. And it's not even that Russia is giving them older equipment, like older tanks, APVs, and so on, but rather just a lack of equipment altogether. And just how many Russian men have to go to the meat grinder before Russians, in large, figure it out that their government does not have their best interests at heart? I do wonder this. I mean, as a good example, even before the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, the Russian or Soviet citizens in the region realized that they wanted and deserved a better standard of living, like their Western European counterparts and North America, for instance. So even back then, without the internet, they were getting pretty privy to all of this information. Then I'll round it off with a bit of a funny today, guys. So, as always, let's see. So with this one, I would consider at least to be a bit of a funny. So forgive me if it's not hilarious, but so recent on-the-ground research has shown that the Russian KH-101 cruise missiles are not as advertised. They do not contain any anti-radar coating, or not really much of it that's actually effective, despite claims made by the Russian government there. So the research conducted by Ukrainian scientists found that the missiles only have 1 out of the 3 required components for stealth technology. And so the body geometry was the one that it had, but even then it wasn't considered very effective. And after performing a radio wave spectrum analysis, Ukraine found that these 101s are largely ineffective with any real stealth profile at all. So this is just yet another example of classic Russia with its paper tiger weapon systems. And I'm sure Russia may have theoretically had the capability to make these weapons to spec, as they expected them to be. But then that would stop the military contractor oligarchs from misappropriating millions in funding for their mansions and super yachts. Oh gee, corrupt and systematically flawed Russian society, effectively sowing the seeds of their own destruction. So thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button. Should see you in the next day or two. And yeah, thanks again for all the support. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.